This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back once again to North Pod, everyone's favourite North Melbourne fan podcast. And it is nearly trade period time, so I thought what better way to get into the spirit of the trade and free agency period than have a look back at our history of trades and free agency. Just to give us a bit of a sense of maybe how our list's been built, or in part built over the past, 10 or so years. So we're just going to have a little deep dive. If there's any other news items and stuff, I'll throw those down at the end of the pod. But essentially, we're gonna just have a look at all the trades. I've started from 2014 and obviously gone to 2022. I just thought further back than 2013 is not really relevant to our current list. So I'm going to try to evaluate whether each was a success for us, a failure for us, or a bit of a who cares. Because often there are those trades that happen, you just go, well, that nothing, no one really won out from that. It was a bit of a nothing trade. I will say, obviously, it's a lot easier to evaluate these things retrospectively. So a lot of these I'm not really going to be saying with judgment like, gee, we got that wrong, how dare us? It's more like retrospectively we can look at it and go, yeah, we got that one right or we got that one wrong. I'm only going to look at trades that actually involve players, because there were a couple of years where we've made trades where it's just draft picks for draft picks and we're sort of swapping our place in the draft. And I just think there kind of needs to be a player in the trade to at least give us something to, evaluate the trade with. So I'm not going to have a look at those. I think it's just worth noting the trades really get more complicated as time goes on. So I was really working hard. I've used some Wikipedia, some North Melbourne websites, some AFL tables. Like, I've put in a fair bit of work to try my best to figure out where things go. But certainly in more recent years, when there's been futures involved and the trades have just got more complicated. And you'll see, I'm going to start 2014. They're relatively simple trades, and then we get to 2021, and there's stuff happening everywhere. So I would try my best. Sometimes it's just a bit hard to figure out where picks have ended up, or if they've been used as points for other things. It can get a bit tricky. Yeah, obviously, just the last thing before we get stuck in, it's harder as time goes on to evaluate them. Like the trades that happened last year, it's pretty hard to evaluate them at this stage if they've been a pass or a fail. So yeah, the earlier ones, it's going to be easier for us to do that, but the more recent trades, it's going to be a bit of a wait and see, or I won't mark it yet. And I think you could probably think of a couple of the recent trades that might apply to. All right, let's get stuck in. So I guess as I'm going through them, some of them I'm going to spend a bit more time on than others. I just think it is worth sort of thinking about how these trades have contributed to where our list is now. You might recall that 2014 and 15 were our preliminary final years. So that was, you'll see these first couple of years we're really going for it. And then we transition away from that into hopefully building a bit of a list eventually. So 2014. So free agents that we got in were Jared Waite and Sean Higgins. Obviously didn't pay anything for them, just their wages. But in terms of trade value, we'd have to pay anything for them. And I mean, I'm not going to mark the free agency just because it's a bit different, but you'd have to say both of those were a success. Jared Waite came in and played 4 seasons, played 60 games, 125 goals, so more than 2 goals a game. And Sean Higgins, 6 seasons, 108 games, won the best and fairest twice. Both of those players made us a better team, and particularly Higgins, who was able to stick around for a bit longer, played some fantastic footy. So yeah, that was 2 big free agency wins, and we picked up Del Santo the year prior. That was, as I say, when we were really going for it. So the early years of free agency, we happened to benefit from it. The only other trade in 2014 was our Levi Greenwood going to Collingwood trade. So that was In pick 25, out Levi Greenwood. So you can see how it was pretty simple, some of these trades earlier on. That pick 25 that we got in became Daniel Nielsen, who was on our list for 4 seasons and played 7 games. Conversely, Greenwood played 7 seasons, 86 games for Collingwood. So while I think probably at the time we thought that we'd won that trade, I think 25 was pretty good value for a midfielder that couldn't break into our side a lot of the time. Given how we used the pick, I think, yeah, that has to go down as a fail for mine. It could also go down in the who cares column, but I think the fact that Levi was at Collingwood for 7 years probably speaks the fact that we lost out on that, and Daniel Nielsen was another one of our draft picks that didn't work. So I'll put that one down as a fail, and that's all of 2014. 2015, here we go. So there's some current players in here, and there's a couple that are kind of tangled up with each other. So I might just go with the more straightforward one first. That was in pick 53 and out Daniel Curry. So Curry was a ruckman. He went off to the Gold Coast just for the 2 seasons, played 6 games. They didn't get much out of him. We got back pick 53, which then got swapped with Collingwood. But look, essentially that pick more or less became Corey Wagner, and he also played 2 seasons and 8 games. So I'm putting that one down as a who cares. It's one of those a couple of fringe players, and nothing came of that. So that is definitely a who cares. Then we've got these 2 trades that are a bit entangled with each other. This first one, in Jed Anderson and pick 38 and pick 40, and out was pick 15 and pick 55. So essentially we sent away our first round draft pick 15, and also our 3rd round 55 would be, or maybe it's middle of 3rd. And then we got back Jed Anderson and some late 2nd round, early 3rd round picks. So you could really look at that as being essentially a 1st round draft pick out for Jed Anderson. Anderson went on to play 7 seasons and 89 games with us and averaged 20 disposals a game. Like, he was a decent player for us, but wasn't a tremendous player. And pick 38 and pick 40 we on-traded for as part of the Ryan Basnack deal, which I'll talk about in a minute. So in terms of the outs, pick 15 became Ryan Burton, and pick 55 was on-traded and GWS used it. So I think, to be honest, this one's a bit of a who cares, but the pick 38 and pick 40 being used in the next trade, I think, is kind of important in terms of what that trade got for us. So on value, I think if you look at it as just in came Jed Anderson and went Ryan Burton, I think it's a bit of a who cares. Ryan Burton's a solid player. Jed Anderson was a solid player. So I'm going to put this trade down as a who cares. But the next trade, which involves some of those picks, as I said, I think is definitely a success for us. So in pick 17, pick 26. So a late 1st round, early 2nd round pick. Out Ryan Bastanak, pick 38, pick 40, and a 2016 3rd round pick. So in terms of Ryan Bastanak, he was a solid player for us. He played for 4 years up at Brisbane, 43 games, played a good first year up there and then faded. So I think we really got rid of him at a high point, I would say. Pick 38 became Reece Matheson for Brisbane, so sort of a role player, and pick 40 was on-traded or used to match PIDs like that. That one seemed to disappear. That 2016 3rd round pick became Caleb Kirby, so no one for Collingwood. Of interest though, pick 17 became Ben McKay for us, and pick 26 became Ryan Clark. So if you think about it, that we essentially traded Bastanak and Reece Matheson, or the opportunity to draft Reece Matheson for Ben McKay and Ryan Clark. That's definitely a success for us. Yeah, really interesting one, because it's interesting to think about the fact that, those 2 trades really netted us Anderson, McKay, and Ryan Clark, and it was 15, 55 out for, essentially. So really interesting that we were able to split that pick 15 into that many players, with a couple of other things added on, of course. But yeah, that was definitely a success for us. Obviously, McKay has been a tremendous defender for us for the past 2 or 3 years, and Clark was decent before we then traded him off to Sydney later on, so we'll talk about him a little bit later. But we've got our first success. We've got 2 who cares and a fail so far. We'll move on to 2016. So, couple of trades this year, a couple of interesting ones. So the first one was in Paul Ahern and out pick 69. I mean, Ahern played 3 seasons and 25 games for us, but never really got going. And pick 69 was on trade to Melbourne and became Dion Johnston or Johnstone. Never heard of him. Didn't play a senior game. Look, it's probably a marginal win for us, but I think ultimately it's a who cares because Paul Ahern didn't become anything of note for us. So he's one of those classic GWS players that we've gotten across due to lack of opportunity or injuries, and we thought we're getting a steal because he was a relatively high draft pick. We paid not a lot for him, but he wasn't able to deliver it for us. So a who cares there. And I mean, you look at pick 69, anything that low is generally either not going to be used or it's a really speculative pick. So you're pretty happy to give up picks like that. Another trade in Nathan Horvat and a 2017 third and fourth round pick, and out was a 2017 third and fourth round pick. So we ended up finishing lower than the Dogs who we were trading with. So essentially, we traded 5 spots in each round to get Nathan Horvat, but those 5 spots were in the third and fourth round. It's another who cares. I mean, we know Horvat didn't give us much. He was a depth player for a couple of years. I don't think we lost out too much. I'd say it's probably a marginal loss for us, but another one that probably goes down the who cares column ultimately. So we're really racking up those who cares ones. 2016 again, in Marley Williams, out pick 105. So we got 4 seasons and 60 games out of Marley Williams, and that 105 was not used by Collingwood, or it was used for points. I'm not sure which. As I said, it was really hard to track where some of these picks ended up. But I do think that's a marginal success for us because, as I said, we were able to get 60 games and 4 seasons out of Marley for literally nothing. Pick 105 is literally nothing. So that I think that's a marginal win. It's not a big win, but it is probably one of those trades that you look at and go, this is where we've tried to pick up all of these kind of depth players from other sides, and it just, in that period, it didn't work for us. Anyway, just worth noting. And then the last one here was in pick 92 and out Aaron Black, which I think at the time looked to me like it was going to be a lose out, but Aaron only played 2 seasons, 7 games at the Cats. So I think this is another who cares. It's just ironic to me that we got Jared Waite in as a free agent, and that's really the reason that Blackie got pushed out of our side, because we had Jared Waite alongside Petrie, and it just didn't look like it was going to work out for Black. But he wasn't able to put much of a dent in things at Geelong. So I think that's another who cares, and we didn't use that pick 92, or it was used for points. Like, it doesn't look like it was used at all. So bit of a nothing pick for a nothing player, as it turned out. Really quiet year in 2017. It was just in pick 91 and out Sam Gibson. He went to Adelaide, just played the 1 year, 5 games, and we didn't use that pick. It was passed, or it was used for points. So again, another who cares, another one of those where we've gotten a player where they want to go, but essentially for nothing, and it hasn't amounted to anything. So Gibson was one of those players that he was a bit of a whipping boy, but played a lot of games at North Melbourne, and during that period where we were pushing, he was an important kind of wing link-up player, even though sometimes his disposal was a bit questionable. I think, we'd love a player like Gibson at the moment on the other wing to Bailey Scott, because he knew how to get the footy and he could run. So it's funny how things change. 2018 is a controversial one. This is where we're getting to see some more current players, or recent players, I guess. So the first one I think is the big one that everyone thinks about, and that was in Jared Polec, Jasper Pittard, and pick 48. And out was pick 11 and a 2019 fourth round pick, so the next draft year. So essentially, more or less, we got in Polek, Pittard, and a early third round pick for pick 11, our first round pick. So Polek got us 4 years and 42 games. Pittard got us 2 years and 31 games. Pick 48 was really hard to figure out where it went, but you could mount an argument that it became Bailey Scott. We picked him at 49. It's a confusing system, but anyway, that pick got moved around a little bit, and then things get swallowed up. But I'm going to say that became Bailey Scott. Now, look, that may not be strictly true, but as I say, it was pick 48 and we took Scott at 49. The pick 11 that we traded out was on-traded twice to end up at GWS. They ended up taking Jai Caldwell. I do think it's worth noting that Zach Butters was taken at pick 12. As I say, it's always easy to be clever in retrospect. That was also the Connor Rosé draft, who was taken a bit earlier. Big difference between Jai Caldwell and Zach Butters as players. So that's what happens in that kind of 10 to 20 section of the draft. There's some that go on to be stars and some that, go on to just be sort of depth players. Yeah, it's a really tricky one to evaluate, because when I saw that Butters was at 12, I think that made me question things. But to be honest, I think this is a small success. Now, let me justify that. I think when you look at the Bailey Scott element, that has to be factored in. Essentially, pick 11's become Bailey Scott, and we got 4 years of Polek and 2 years of Pittard, who weren't fantastic. The thing that gets lost with Polek is the issue was how much we were paying him. That was the big issue with Jared, not necessarily what we traded out to get him when you think of what else we were getting. I mean, Pittard was the steak knives in that, and he was decent in his 31 games. Another one of those kind of whipping boys that could be a bit erratic. So, look, controversial maybe, but I think if you forget the fact that Zach Butters was picked at 12, because you're not to know that, I do think it's a small success given that we ended up with Bailey Scott. So, look, you can fight me on that one. I totally agree that we shouldn't have been paying Jared Polek that amount of money, but I don't think this trade in itself was a failure, which I would have definitely said it was prior to kind of having a look at how it turned out, I suppose. These two I've combined into the one trade, but essentially it was in Dom Tyson and out Ryan Clark and Braden Pruce. So this is an easy fail, very easy one. In reality, it was out Ryan Clark and in pick 61, and then we sent on 61 with Pruce to get Dom Tyson. So that's why I've combined them. Dom Tyson was with us for 3 years and he played 6 games. It was a classic. We're trying to get this fringe player who's had some injury troubles, and we're going to hopefully fix him. Ryan Clark up in Sydney is going fantastic. 57 games across 5 seasons so far, so he's living his best life. Still not an absolute consolidated best 23 player, but he's in and out, and boy, we could use a player like him. And Braden Pruce only played the 20 games at Melbourne and at GWS, but yeah, it's a classic. We'd love a ruckman right now, so putting that down as a failure. Braden Pruce is one of those ones that's on the ruck merry-go-round for this year, and we'd love a player like him. Whilst he's really struggled to stay fit, I think, yeah, we'd love some ruck depth, and Ryan Clark would have been fantastic now. So that's an easy one to put down as a fail. And the last one from 2018 was in Aaron Hall and out pick 68. That pick 68 was traded on a million times, but eventually it became Jake Tarker for Geelong. Never heard of him, didn't play a game as far as I'm aware. So Aaron Hall had the 58 games across 5 years. I think that one has to go down as a success. Like or love Aaron Hall, there wasn't much left at pick 68. So the fact that we were able to get Aaron Hall at that price, I think definitely is worth it. And again, people can look at it and go, Aaron Hall wasn't a great player, but we used that pick to get a player of better value in Aaron Hall. So that has to go down as a success for me. So far, we're about to look at 2019. I've got written down 4 successes, 6 who cares, and 2 fails, which is interesting to think about. I would have thought we'd have more fails by now, but not yet. probably a lot of them are, who cares, to be honest. They're being put there instead. 2019, just the one trade and one free agency decision. So we got in Josh Walker, played 3 seasons and 54 games for us as a delisted free agent. So a solid top-up player, but not someone that changed our side. But he certainly filled a role for those 3 seasons, given he played 2.5 seasons worth of games there. The trade, in Aiden Bonner and a 2020 4th round pick, and out a 2020 3rd round pick. So essentially, to get Aiden Bonner, we have downgraded from the 3rd round to the 4th round. So far, Bonner's played 28 games in 4 years for us. He's still on the list as I record this, but I do have fears that he may be on the chopping block soon. And that 4th round pick that we got, it was hard, again, another one that's hard to tell, but I think it became Eddie Ford or Lockie Young. It was a bit tricky to tell. The 3rd round pick that we traded out was used for points for GWS to get some academy players, so hard to evaluate that one. To be honest, I think this one's going to go down as a who cares. And so it's another who cares. We downgraded from the 3rd to the 4th round. If I could definitively tell you that we got Eddie Ford out of this trade, I'd be saying success. So I do want to be clear on that. But if we got Lockie Young out of it, it's probably down as a who cares. So that's why I'm going who cares as opposed to success. Someone might be able to tell me, but I found it really hard to track some of these picks and where they ended up, particularly when they were future ones. So apologies. I tried my best with the research. It's tricky. As I said, it gets more complicated as the years go on. So that's 2019. 2020. So this is where we are definitely looking at some things that have impacted our future and our present. So 2020, the first trade was pick 30 in and out Sean Higgins, who obviously went to Geelong for a year or two and nearly won a premiership. That pick 30 became Charlie Lazaro. Really tempting for me to put this one in the who cares column, but I'm going to put it down as a success. My reason for that is Lazaro still could become something, and Higgins, whilst he was a fantastic player for us, he's out of the system now. So it's probably, I'm being kind by putting it down as a success. It's a bit, probably more accurately, it's a wait and see, and we probably will have a few of those coming up. But I think Lazaro has the opportunity to become something for us, or at least become something in trade value for us next year. So that one was fair enough. I do think we sold Higgins maybe a year too late. We probably could have got something in the late teens, early 20s for him a year earlier, but pick 30 became Lazaro, and I don't think we can complain about that. The next one is in Lockie Young and pick 70 and out pick 62. So we've downgraded 8 spots. We've gotten ourselves Lockie Young. Pick 70 was used in a really small part as the Jaden Stevenson deal, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the pick 62 that we sent away was used as on trade several points. It became passed or used for draft points. So I think this is a who cares. Lockie Young obviously hasn't been anything for us, but pick 62. So I think that's where we've got to sometimes look at it and go, sure, we have got in a lot of these players that haven't worked, but we haven't given up much for them. Anything that's sort of past 50 or 55 in the draft, you look at it and you go, there's not a heap of value attached to those picks. They're really speculative picks. And sure, you can still hit a successful player that late, but it's really hard. So I don't mind if you're using those on taking a risk on an established player. Here is the Ben Brown trades. There's a couple of trades that are interconnected here, and this one does hurt. So in pick 26, pick 33, and a 2021 4th round pick. Out Ben Brown and pick 28 and a 2021 4th round pick. So let's just forget about those 4th round picks that were essentially swapped. Who cares? Pick 26 and pick 33 for Ben Brown and pick 28. So you can really think about that as we traded out Ben Brown for about pick 32, something like that. Both of 26 and 33 were on-traded as part of the Steve-O deal, which I'll look at in a minute. So it makes it really hard to evaluate this trade. But I mean, Ben Brown went on and played at a premiership at Melbourne. He's played 3 seasons there so far, 39 games, 66 goals. I think it's fair to say that we got him out just before he's fallen off, or at least probably a year before he fell off. However, I mean, I really think that we sold him at a low point. Like, to get essentially pick 32 or 31 for Ben Brown, who kicked the most goals at the club for the last 4 years or so. Yeah, we didn't sell him at a good time. Obviously, Larky's come on fantastically in his absence, so again, it's a really hard one to evaluate, but I have to put this one down as a fail because I don't think we sold Ben Brown at the right time. Now, I know he was coming into contract, like a lot of moving parts, but yeah, whilst I don't hate the fact that we got rid of him given his injuries, I don't think we got what we should have gotten for him. I really think that we got ripped off. So I'm putting that one down as a fail. However, the next one, which is very related to that trade, was in Jaden Stevenson, Artu Bosanvalagi, and pick 39, and out was 26, 33, and 70. So all of those were picks that we collected over the Lockie Young and the Ben Brown trades. And this one has to be a success just based on Jaden Stevenson. So Steve-O's obviously been a pretty solid player for us, had a good year. R2 lasted a year or two and is no longer with us. Phoenix Spicer was what pick 39 became, who looks like he's on the way out, but it was worth a go. So essentially we've ended up with Jaden Stevenson from that trade, but 26 became Nathan O'Driscoll, not sure about him. Pick 33 became Liam McMahon. Pick 70 was past or users points. So although it was 2 second-round picks that we traded out, I think the fact that we've ended up with Jaden Stevenson at that price is a success. Hopefully he's going to go on to bigger and better things and prove more of a success. But I think in all balance and fairness, if I'm going to call the Ben Brown one a failure, I think I have to call this one a success. And they kind of evened each other out. I think we got Jaden Stevenson pretty cheap, but we gave away Ben Brown. We didn't get good value. And we also got Aiden Corrin as a free agent that year. Jury's out. He had a really injury-interrupted 2021. He was not good in 2022, and he didn't start 2023 off very well, but I thought he ended it really well. So I do think that there's a chance that he could do us proud and be a successful free agent, but he's another one of those ones where we're a little worried about how much we're paying him. We've got 2 years to go. 2021. So this is where some of them get a little bit complicated, as I said. In Callum Coleman-Jones, pick 42, pick 47, and a 2022 fourth-round pick. Out Robbie Tarrant, pick 40, and a 2022 second-round pick. Gets complicated, as I said. Pick 42 that we got in was on-traded, and, essentially that became Paul Curtis. Pick 47 was part of that. So 42 and 47 essentially became Paul Curtis. That 2022 fourth-round pick disappeared. Robbie Tarrant obviously played a year or two at Richmond and has since retired. Pick 40 was on-traded, and that 2022 second-round draft pick that we sent to Richmond was on-traded and became Max Krzyzewski at GWS, who, whilst he hasn't played a game yet, is exactly the kind of player that we could use at the moment, in that he's a bit of a utility who can play forward and back and would have been a great speculative pick for us to take. So this one is, I think at this stage, a wait and see, leaning towards success. Paul Curtis, we think, is a find, but yeah, that opportunity lost with a player like Max Krzyzewski worries me a little bit. So this is a wait and see. It's not a who cares. I do think there's some value in that one, but it's an interesting one to follow. If we can get a lot of value out of Callum Coleman-Jones, I think we're all good. But the jury's definitely still out on him. But we were right to get rid of Robbie Tarrant. We weren't going to get any compo for him if he left as a free agent. So yeah, essentially it was Coleman-Jones and 2 second-round picks for Robbie Tarrant and 2 second-round picks. That was really the essence of the trade. It's just that our second-round picks were a little bit later, so we were kind of downgrading some second-round picks there. And we also picked up Hugh Greenwood as a delisted free agent that year, so been a great depth player for us the last couple of years. And the last year to have a look at, 2022. So Griffin Logue, Darcy Tucker, and a 2023 third round pick. In and out were a second and a third round 2023 pick that we got as assistance package from the AFL. We had to trade them, and a 2023 fourth round pick that was ours. So, yeah, if you look at it as we got Griffin Logue for a second round pick and Darcy Tucker for a fourth round pick, I think that one is definitely a success. Griffin Logue's integral to who we are at the moment, and he's going to be super missed next year. And Darcy Tucker could be a solid depth player. So, yeah, that was the AFL assistance package working in our favour. And then the other one is the big one, the mega trade. So I've tried to condense this down to just how we were impacted by it. I've tried to get rid of, all the other stuff that happened because it was a very complicated trade. But essentially, we sent out Jason Horne-Francis and pick 1 and a 2023 third round pick. And we got in pick 2, pick 3, pick 40, pick 43, and a 2023 first round pick, which is currently 14, Port Adelaide's pick. Before the academies and whatnot, it'll probably become something like 18 or 19. So, yeah, when you boil it down, which is really hard to do, essentially we traded Horne-Francis and pick 1 for pick 2, pick 3, and some extras. Unfortunately, that first round pick from Port Adelaide is coming quite late. We were sort of banking, I think, on Port Adelaide not having the season they've had and maybe finishing more like mid-table and getting us something like pick 8, 9 or 10. But this is definitely a wait and see. I think the fact that ideally we were probably not going to pick Cabman anyway. You can make an argument that we should have, but it looks like we weren't going to pick Cabman. So we were essentially saying, look, we don't want Cabman. We're happy to take Sheeslaw, Wardlaw, and we had to get Horne-Francis out, so we were able to get the other. To me, it's leaning towards success. I mean, pick 40, we ended up splitting into two third round picks, and Cooper Harvey was one of those. So it's leaning towards success. It's probably too early to tell at this stage, and we're not going to know for a long time based on the careers of Sheezel and Wardlaw and Cadman and Horne-Francis, but this one is definitely looking positive for us, I would say. We had to get Horne-Francis out, so it was unavoidable. So just looking at my final tally here, I've got 7 successes, 8 who cares, and 3 fails, and I think that's a pretty decent summary of our trading. And there's not a lot that you go, gee, we got an absolute bargain there. There's also not a lot that you go, gee, what a massive fail. Generally, they were small level fails, but so many of those players mentioned are obviously players that, are not on our list anymore. The last couple of years, obviously, Coleman, Jones, Core, Greenwood, Logue, Tucker, that makes sense that they'd still be around. But prior to that, a lot of these trades haven't become long-term successful players for us. They've been the sort of players that have stuck around for 4 or 5 years, and that's been it. And I think it's important to remember going into the trade part that often it's not the trading that we North Melbourne are going to make big gains. It's more likely to be in the draft. It's really hard to get players wanting to come across North Melbourne. It looks like Dylan Stevens wants to do that this year, which is fantastic. But yeah, I think the draft is where the big money is made for us, and it's much harder for us to know immediately whether or not we've won at the draft. So I might do something similar to this looking over our previous drafts in the future, but it is, that's a lot more speculative and can often be unfair to retroactively review drafts because, it's where you're just making a prediction on what those players are going to become, which can be tricky. Quick bit of news before I let you go. I'm sure by now you've seen that Todd Goldstein's going to be playing elsewhere in 2024, potentially at Essendon. That's been the talk. We'll have to wait and see. Looks like we weren't willing to offer him a 2-year deal and someone else has. So good luck to him. I think it's sad, obviously. Goldy was a fantastic player for us over a good 15-year period, but I think it makes sense. We shouldn't be offering him more than a year, and we've got to try and get whoever our next ruckman is to play some football. So whether that's Cherry or someone that we bring in through the draft period, or the trade period rather, I do think it's the right move for us moving forward, and sure, it does set our ruck stocks back. We're in desperate need of a ruckman now. We already were. I do think, it's the right thing to do for him and for us. And we're still waiting on delisting news. Potentially by the time I've released this, there's been some delistings, but still none. So we're going to have to wait and bide our time a little bit longer to see who's coming in or out. Just jumping in here with a little addendum. Since I recorded that part, the Ben McKay news has also come in, and he's requested a move to Essendon in free agency. I think we all knew that he was leaving. It seemed to go backwards and forwards over the past couple of weeks in terms of Sydney or Hawthorn or Essendon or Port in the early days. But he's requested the move to Essendon, reuniting with Brad Scott, the old coach. So, there's one little domino to fall. We'll have to wait a couple of weeks to find out or to confirm our compensation. But, all the talk is that it's going to be pick 3, because it seems like Essendon's offered him a fair amount of money. And they must have, because, I wouldn't be picking for agency Essendon as the club to move to. That being said, I think the McKay brothers did support Essendon growing up, so maybe that was a little factor. But one domino falls. We're officially losing McKay. It's just going to be whether or not it is that band 1 for agency compensation, or whether or not we have to make the Dons trade for him. So good to have a little one thing fall into place at least. We know that we're losing him and we're expecting a fair bit of compensation, but beyond that, not a real update, because it's just an indication at this stage. We've got to wait for free agency to open in a couple of weeks. So finally, what we've thought all year, Ben McKay is on the way out. Thanks for listening to the pod. I hope it was somewhat interesting. As I said, it's always really easy to look back on things and go, gee, we nailed that. Often it takes several years to be able to evaluate trades. So hopefully during this upcoming trade period, we make a few that go on to be successful. Let's set our expectations low. We want the club to do the right thing and to make some big calls, but the draft is where you can really find some players. So exciting times ahead. Hope you have a fantastic week. And I'll speak to you next week with a trade period preview of sorts. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. Please subscribe to the podcast on your app and give me a rating or a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. You can find me on all social media at North Pod Show. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, you name it, I'm there. I'll see you next episode.